All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to CONSERVATISH, episode 161. My name is Peter Feliciano. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening. Make sure you share, like, rate, review, wherever you're listening right now, especially on YouTube. Hit that little bell next to the subscribe thing so that you can see all my wonderful content, the money face. You can find me on Instagram at Peter_Feliciano. You can find me on TikTok for now at CONSERVATISH. And I'm on Twitter and Facebook as well. And it is my great pleasure to welcome our guest, Terrisa Bukovinac. Yay! Thank you so much.
Hey, everybody.
So I wanted to, I've been following, one of the things I talked with Kristen Hawkins about a couple episodes ago was the idea that when I started changing over and really solidifying my ideas around politics and things like that, one of the baddest news, one of the worst pieces of news was, for me, was like, oh no, am I pro-life? Ew. Like, I had all these judgments for years about what that meant, And so I did some digging and I started following your pro-life SF, and also I think secular pro-life I'm also following as well.
Great.
And it was refreshing to me when I started kind of digging and started coming out of the woodwork as somebody who was not 100% liberal all the time, forever and ever, amen, to find people who were also in the middle, to find people who were also, who didn't, I was thinking about it like, I don't know if it's necessarily the fact that I was born in Long Island, but moved out to the Bay Area when I was 9 and then moved back a year ago. So I have a little bit of both coast flavor. I don't know if it's the fact that I'm half Puerto Rican and I'm like 45% white. I don't know what that little mix is. I don't know if it's I'm a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll, but the bottom line is I like people who stand out, and you're one of those people, and what you do is one of those things. So to give everybody a kind of a rundown, what's your your website is Pro-Life San Francisco, Pro-Life SF. What is give us a little backstory on what you do.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. I am a pro-life atheist. I'm a registered Democrat. I am a vegan. I'm an animal rights activist, and I am the founder and executive director of Pro-Life San Francisco. We are a millennial-led grassroots activist organization operating in arguably one of the most pro-choice cultures in America and possibly the world. We seek to educate our community, which is the Bay Area, this very pro-abortion community, on the topic of abortion. We look to connect pregnant people with resources by, helping out with the pregnancy centers, promoting the work of the pregnancy centers, doing sidewalk advocacy in order to really continue to promote these services that are already available in the pro-life movement. And then finally, we do nonviolent direct action to confront and resist the influence of abortion in our community.
Right. Yeah. One of the biggest things that I've seen from my digging into what you do, and Kristen also talked about it as well, was the UC San Francisco and all the creepy stuff that they do. It's one of those things. Actually, I don't know if you saw, not that, I mean, that's where it's kind of strange, because I want to say, like, I want to tell the story about how San Francisco had like a coming out Trump supporter day. And I know you're not a Trump supporter, but it was interesting to watch. I kind of support anybody being like, brave enough to kind of come out that way. I've gotten some flack, obviously, over the years. It's been about 2 years since I started the show, and I was in music for a long time beforehand, and especially not just San Francisco, because I used to live not far from the TL where you're at. What up? I used to live in Chinatown for about 4.5 years.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And do a lot of music, both singing and playing guitar, singer-songwriter stuff, as well as writing and singing hooks for rappers around the country, and especially around the Bay Area. And so I was in I had roots in this very liberal, very, everybody always believes the same thing, no matter what.
It's like that everywhere.
It's especially like that in San Francisco. I moved to
I don't
New
think
York.
so.
I moved to New York. So this is just my experience. When I moved to New York, when I would tell people in New York about what the show is, and I'd say the word conservatish, they wouldn't rear back. They'd be like, mm-hmm. In San Francisco, I'd say the word conservatish and there'd be a little bit of like, okay, you better explain yourself. There's some pearl clutching happening.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
yeah. So I don't think, or one of the things that I've gotten flack for is like, oh, you must just be a contrarian. It's like, no, this is not easy for me to do. I don't
Yeah.
like this. I don't like losing acquaintances and sometimes friends. I don't like people unfollowing me. I don't like being shadow banned on social media. This is not fun for me. I mean, it's fun in a lot of ways. I get to meet people like you and have great conversations, and I'm amazing at it and humble. But it's not easy. Do you ever get in being a Democrat, a vegan, atheist, and yet also pro-life, do you ever get people accusing you of being just contrarian for contrarian's sake?
Oh, for sure. And I even have to self-evaluate sometimes and say, wait, am I just taking this position because it's unpopular? But I think it's more of just like, I've developed enough as a person in my life and have enough life experience to know that we have to take each issue separately, that everything does deserve scrutiny. I mean, I've had such major paradigm shifts in my life. I went from being a Christian to being an atheist. I went from, growing up on a farm to being a vegan. So it's like when you've had these very serious ideological changes in your life, I think it forces you to be a little bit more open to a variety of views. And to your point about like people in San Francisco being like, oh, conservative-ish, like, yeah, I think that that's to be expected. San Francisco does have a much more liberal vibe even than New York. But I think that you would have to accurately compare it to like starting a podcast called Liberalish in like Mississippi or something.
That's valid. That's valid.
I think that like all people in all communities, are susceptible to kind of that like group mentality thinking. And maybe in New York, it is a little bit more egalitarian in a way, but it's still people reacting to their environment and how people expect them to react. So it's not specific to people in San Francisco. It just happens to be the most liberal place in America.
Right. Especially Berkeley, Oakland, all in that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I think it's youngness. Youngness creates this idealism, and the idealism, and especially lack of knowledge of other people. Same thing goes, you're right, absolutely, for like people in Mississippi who just assume everyone in California is blonde, surfing, or,
and loves abortion.
And loves abortion, right. And people in California assume everybody in Mississippi is, has a straw in their mouth and
yeah.
has certain relationships with their cousins. So
yes.
See how I cleaned that up, everybody? Aren't I wonderful? Where along the line did you become pro-life specifically?
It didn't happen until after I lost my faith. That was a big life-changing experience for me. It happened over the course of many years, but over time, I woke up. I was going through the motions. I was very involved in my church. I was on the board of evangelicals, and just really having a lot of doubts about this idea of life after death, and that, there's a God out there that truly cares about us. And, just a lot of philosophical issues that I would research and go to apologists about, but just were never really answered to my satisfaction. And eventually I just woke up one day and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I am an atheist. Like, it sucks. I'm sad. I'm going to have to go through, this healing process, which I feel like I still am going through. But I had to kind of accept it. And once I accepted that made me think about my life entirely differently. I didn't think, I just happened to, God has a will for my life. There's a purpose for my life. And that's why, I'm living today. And, there were just, I always, not always, but at a certain point in my life, I did come to understand that abortion was probably something wrong or something bad, especially as it related to my feelings on animal rights. People would challenge me and say, how can you care about the dolphins when you don't care about unborn children being killed in the womb? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just a clump of cells. So there was a point where I was shown that was not the case, and that, there probably is some type of violence happening here. But in my faith world, I thought, there's all these horrible things happening. there's human trafficking, there's murder, there's rape. I'm literally not getting involved or doing anything about any of these issues. And it's not nearly as morally complicated as something like bodily rights and pregnancy. So I'm just going to stay pro-choice. But I had some, personal sensitivities to it. But it wasn't until I really did not believe in this idea of life after death anymore, or the idea that there was like a God out there somewhere who was going to right all the wrongs in the end. And that really at first motivated me to get involved politically, at least like to have those conversations online. I mean, these are the years when the internet was kind of exploding, and atheism was a new atheism, and people were really like hashing out these ideas in a way that I hadn't really been exposed to before growing up in a Christian tradition. And so I thought, wow, and back then, there were states, I don't know the situation so much anymore. I'm not up to date on, where we are in terms of like secular rights. But back then it was illegal in some states for atheists to even hold public office. And so that made me feel like I am an atheist against my will. I am an atheist. And I have opinions and a voice and thoughts about ethics, and to think that I am discriminated against to this degree where I am literally not even allowed to be considered for public office. I'm considered, just like an enemy of the world, basically. That made me want to get involved more politically, or get interested in the role that secular people play in politics. And so as I was having like these more in-depth conversations online about religion, atheism, and ethics, and veganism, abortion would come up, and people would say, yeah, well, I'm sure you support Planned Parenthood though, because, I'm a big leftist. And I'm like, I don't think that I do really. And that kind of put a little pressure on me to really square away those ideals, like being an atheist, not believing in heaven, believing that it's wrong to murder animals, and knowing that, how I feel about abortion, knowing that I think that it is probably not a good thing. Like maybe I should get into this issue a little bit more. And then eventually I found secular pro-life, because like it's like you get marginalized for having these seemingly unpopular ideas, even though being pro-life is not unpopular at all. It's just a silenced and stigmatized position.
Right.
But it wasn't until I saw secular pro-life that I'm like, oh, there are other people like me out there. I can do this publicly. And then, there was so much more information for me to get exposed to, and that really solidified my opinion. And then the more I got involved, the more I realized needed to be done, the more urgent the issue was. 1 million deaths a year. And, learning about the methods for abortion, and, the financial incentive. And of course, like as an anti-capitalist, I was like infuriated. And then the rise of Donald Trump platforming off of the issue, and realizing he didn't have a chance of reaching anybody in San Francisco. I mean, like you said, you even bring up the word conservative-ish, and they're like, right. You pitch the pro-life movement through Donald Trump, and this community, the San Francisco community, isn't going to hear it. And yet the San Francisco community is the community that must hear it. San Francisco is the key to ending abortion. It is the hub of all pro-abortion everything. And if we are able to ignite a movement in San Francisco that puts enough pressure on the industry to make them have to explain themselves, to back down, in various ways, chipping away at the industry here, it will eventually domino everywhere. So I thought, man, you know what? YOLO.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah, that's exactly why I did what I did, because it's like, you know what, I only live once. I don't want to be one of those artists, one of those musicians who gets caught later on, donating money to the wrong ideology. It's like, you know what, I better just come out swinging. And that's what I did with this. And it certainly has cost me a few acquaintances and friends, and maybe 1 or 2 opportunities. But honestly, one of the things that came up when you were talking just there about like, yes, I would say the word conservatish, the name of the show, and people would like rear back a little bit, but not much because I look racially ambiguous. Like that's what's kind of weird about the white liberalism of San Francisco and probably everywhere else. But is that there's this idea of, well, I can question you because you have a certain ideology, but as soon as I realize that your identity is higher on me on the victim wheel, then that means I can't, on the victim level, then I can't question you. And it's kind of sad that like I'm only allowed to get away with certain things because I'm half Puerto Rican, you know what I mean? Because people are unsure, it's upsetting. And in San Francisco specifically, I think that makes a lot of sense. That San Francisco would be the keystone of that arch through which we walk through towards pro-life, because San Francisco is and the whole Bay Area is big on, we protect those who can't protect themselves. We give a voice to the voiceless, whether it be through trans or through race or through whatever. We give a voice to the voiceless. Who is voiceless more than babies? You know what I mean? Than babies in the womb. Nobody. Who can't protect themselves more than an unborn child?
Literally no one. And I am sensitive to your experience on that, and I agree that it is unfortunate that that's kind of the mentality that you get a platform because of your racial identity, but I think that it speaks to a much broader reality for all humans, which is that we don't acknowledge or think about someone else's point of view unless we perceive that they are the same as us. And while I think, from your perspective, it feels like, this is specific about your race. I think it's much more about ideology. It's that because you're half Puerto Rican, people who hold liberal values think that you might be more in line with them ideologically speaking, and then therefore are much more likely to consider your point of view. And that's the same everywhere. Like if I was in Mississippi, I would be, if I, came out guns a-blazing as a liberal, they'd be like, "Whoa, get that girl out of here. Whatever she has to say, I'm sure it's not important." But, if I'm wearing like, pearls in a pantsuit or something, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's more Texas, but yeah. I get it.
I probably have a much better chance of them wanting to hear what I have to say. Right. And I think that it's about that confirmation bias, and we have to, sorry, I'm going to have to charge my phone more. I thought it would last longer, but I think that we have to really be sensitive about people's confirmation bias rather than just calling it out and being like, that's unfair, because like it is across the board. We're all doing it all the time. We have to use it to our advantage. Right. And we need to turn that into a power for us, a way for us to advance the ideologies and the causes that we care about. And so that's why I'm so glad that you are giving a voice this cause, in the Bay Area. We, Pro-Life San Francisco, like obviously I'm a liberal, but we do represent people from across the political, religious, and ideological spectrum. And I think that your point of view, being kind of, like you said, more middle of the road, more moderate, and on the conservative side, that's going to be really powerful for a lot of people in the Bay Area who do need to feel emboldened in their own points of view, and rather than just being stigmatized and shamed by the confirmation bias of the people around them.
Right. Yeah, I like straddling the fence, and your group as well as my show is a good example of people who don't just automatically demonize the other side. You know what I mean?
Right.
One of the things that I noticed, in line with that San Francisco idea was you have to agree with me or agree with the party line 100%. And there's nobody, whether it be right or left, that I agree with. I mean, there's a lot of people, as an example, not as many as being, to tell you the truth, of a lot of the people who don't follow a good amount of conservatives, but I follow a lot of liberals and a lot of conservatives. And there certainly has been a lot of, one of the things I don't necessarily fall in line with the conservative side is is the anti-mask thing. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's just
Yeah.
I'm obsessive compulsive, but like I'm wearing that stuff. Not outside. I don't mind. Whatever. But like I don't like, oh, this is my freedom. Like yeah, okay, but let's not die and let's protect old people. But just because I believe that doesn't mean that I also think let's kill babies. Yay. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like this is complicated. There's nuance here. And the fact that you can come into a room, even though you're a liberal, you're an atheist, and you're a Democrat, and you're vegan, with a bunch of, meat-eating Jesus lovers and still come together on this one issue is incredibly powerful. And we need more people like that. We need more people like that,
Thank you. Well, I've learned the hard way, and I've done a lot of research on social justice movements. I mean, like I said, I don't believe in heaven, so I'm not doing this for any good reward later. I'm doing this because I believe that we can win, and I believe that my work can help make that happen. But man, I forget what I was saying. What were you saying?
No, I mean, so you started in this idea. Let's talk about UCSF. UCSF. It's hashtagged a lot of things. Abortion harvesting and body harvesting and things like that. Do you feel like, in as simple terms as you can put it, is that what is going on with UC San Francisco?
Yes. In the simplest terms, UCSF is supplying their research labs on a monthly basis with late-term, viable, healthy, by definition, human fetuses for medical experimentation. And in order to do those abortions, to preserve the tissue for that type of research, they can only do it through a fully live dismemberment procedure or a medical induction, which, according to the Society of Family Planning, a pro-choice institution, a medically induced abortion at those late gestational ages produces born alive infants up to half of the time. So this is live dismemberments and born alive infants past the age of viability, healthy parents being supplied to these research labs on a monthly basis. It is the worst aspect of abortion extremism in America today, by far, as far as I'm concerned. I can't think, I don't know how else to describe to people that like dismembering a baby alive is like probably not a good idea. But I can tell you that I find very few people who are willing to actively defend it.
There are. Now that 50%, are you saying that upwards of 50 or around 50% of those children who come there, because I think our verbiage is important, are alive when they are dismembered?
Well, we know that they are because they cannot use digoxin, which is the feticide that's used generally in late-term abortions to give the fetus a heart attack. So then they can be dismembered after they've already passed away. But in the cases of fetal tissue research, the feticide, it ruins the stem cells. They're not usable for research at that point. So we know that UCSF does not use digoxin, based on all of the published studies on digoxin. We know that they can't be using it if they're using for research. We also have footage from the Center for Medical Progress from online archives showing top abortionists at UCSF, Dr. Eleanor Dry, talking about not using digoxin on camera. And we have Dr. Deborah Nucatola from Planned Parenthood on camera talking about how the only places where they can go consistently to get fetuses without digoxin is UCSF and Planned Parenthood New York City, because Planned Parenthood New York City is all trained by UCSF. And she calls them the UCSF school. UCSF is the top abortion trainer in the world. And they are the most politically involved medical institution on the issue worldwide. They have a global outreach program reaching into Africa and other third world countries pushing abortion on those populations. And they are also heavily involved in the development and the distribution of RU486, the abortion pill. Their abortion doctors are all very involved in California politics and are very active on Twitter, and are just really, really involved in this issue all the way around. These programs have been funded by Warren Buffett since the 1960s. Packard Bell and Gates are also deeply invested in fetal tissue research, in everything that's happening at UCSF, and just really the expansion of the pro-abortion agenda in general across the globe.
Do you know some of the stickier details? Do you know if, say, a Planned Parenthood in Daly City or wherever brings a baby up to UCSF for research, how do they transport that, number one? And number two, do they give the child at least like painkillers, or would that actually mess with the stem cells?
Yeah, as far as we know, there's the studies that have been published on this, like Dr. George Gerlach, he is a researcher that was working out of the University of Pittsburgh, who did research on infants doing stem cell harvesting from infants past the age of viability in vivo, which means of the living. So what they were doing in that project, which gives us kind of a glimpse into this world, is that they were putting the fetuses into bags of solution after they were born. So they either drown in the solution and die, or, just from lack of care, but they put them on ice and move them over to the research lab and then are dissected. So they likely die either in the solution or via dissection. We don't know, because UCSF has not made public their protocols for verifying signs of life, which indicates to us that they're not doing that. And, we've listened to hours of testimony in David Delyden's hearings in San Francisco, hearing from like these UCSF doctors and other Planned Parenthood doctors. And we know that in general, they just look for breathing. And if they don't see breathing, then they are saying that, the baby's not alive, but not actually checking for a heartbeat or anything like that. And we know that they have supplied, like, not just UCSF in general, but in the Bay Area, STEM Express, one of the tissue middleman companies, purchased beating hearts from, I believe it was Planned Parenthood, and sold them to Stanford. Beating hearts. And then, we had testimony in the courtroom. We had to have expert testimony saying, no, a beating heart means the baby's still alive, as if like that is called into question. And so we know that you can't, like, it was so detailed in court. Like, we know now that you cannot like get a heart to start beating after it stopped. That is useless to them for researchers. So if they are donating hearts that are still beating, putting it on a Langendorf machine to keep it beating, then that came from a live baby. Right. And so, and not to mix it up too much with UCSF, but it's part of the same story. And this is Bay Area abortion extremism, and it's institutions like Planned Parenthood, NARAL, UCSF, and STEM Express and Advanced Bioscience resources that are advancing these horrors. Right. And yet we have a Department of Justice, a U.S. Department of Justice, that has sat on this evidence for years. They started their investigation in 2017. And to this day, it's been more than 5 years since David's videos came out. And the DOJ has done absolutely nothing to show us the evidence of what they uncovered in their investigation. And we're demanding justice from the DOJ. So we're headed there October 8th. I'm going to do a demonstration outside the headquarters there, calling on Bill Barr to do his job. We need justice in not just our community, but in communities across the country. And we have seen so much evidence come out about through the discovery process in David's hearings that prove that baby body parts have been bought and sold and trafficked in our state. And yet we have no justice on this issue. So it's an election year, so a lot of conservatives have kind of shied away from criticizing a Trump-appointed leader of the Department of Justice or head of the department. But you know, we're done waiting. I mean, it's been more than 5 years.
Right.
And these are some of the most horrific crimes against humanity in the world. And we need justice from the department that actually has that in their name.
Right. And we can tell that this ideology leaves the door so far open. So that's the thing about extremism, is that a lot of these people might be willing, especially pro-choicers, and I have a number of who are my fans or who are my friends and family who have shared with me that they think it's abhorrent, but they wouldn't be comfortable telling a woman what to do with her body, even though it's not her body. You know, as Patrice O'Neill put it, you know, her body is just the apartment. Her body is just it does take sustenance, and it is living in there for 9 months. But we've already seen from, I think it was Virginia, it might have been the governor of Virginia who was on that radio show about a year and a half ago.
Ralph Northam, sorry.
That's okay.
Trying to charge my phone here.
Yeah, it's all right.
Give me 1 sec, just so we can get a good shot.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's okay.
Lovely.
We're back.
You know, we can already tell that this ideology leaves the door so far wide open. They want to leave it so far open for the people who are in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that they need to, quote unquote, leave it open for somebody who's 9 months, right? For a baby who's 9 months in the womb. And I think it was the governor of Virginia, it might have been Georgia, who was on that radio program talking about how if a baby is born after abortion, like if they try to abort the baby at 9 months, the baby is born, well, us keeping it alive is not between us, it's between the doctor and the mother, which means that the door is so far wide open that if they try to abort a baby at 9 months, which is way more than quote unquote viable, it comes out, it's alive, the baby and the doctor and the mother can decide whether or not. So that's really the crux of it, is that life should not be decided on whether it's wanted or not. You know what I mean? A baby who even at 18 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever they're at UCSF is doing the majority of their experiments, just because it's not wanted doesn't mean that it's not valuable. You know what I mean? I've been unwanted many times in my life, and I'm valuable. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
I think it's a complicated argument, though, with the my body, my choice, and saying, oh, well, it's not your body. I think that is really sidestepping the argument that pro-choicers are making, which isn't that the my body, my choice argument is saying, for the sake of the argument, it doesn't matter whether or not the baby's a person. It's that no one has the right to use their body against your will to sustain their life. So I think it's a different argument than saying that it's a denial of personhood. So it doesn't actually come into play when we're talking about late-term abortion, because once you're past the age of viability, autonomy can be restored without killing the baby.
yeah, it's 22 weeks, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. So my body, my choice is not about whether or not the baby is there. That is a different argument. They're saying that no one has the right to use your body to sustain their life. Well, that can be vindicated at 22 weeks. So that alone, I mean, the abortion industry is protecting late-term abortion because it is extremely lucrative, because it is a growing industry for fetal tissue research. There is no lack of a demand for these monthly supplies of these late-term fetuses. And we also know, because of the things that many Democratic politicians, pro-choice Democratic politicians have said, which is that if we even protect infants born alive, then it potentially gives personhood to unborn fetuses. And they fear that it will ultimately chip away at abortion rights. And they're willing to trade that for literal infants being born alive, and sometimes, we have every reason to believe, subsequently killed for medical research. It's a horror that absolutely must be addressed. Now, most pro-choice people aren't on board with late-term abortion. That's the thing. And the Democratic Party acts like it is a majority position. They literally put it into their party platform, including ending taxpayer funding of abortion. That's not even an opinion the majority of Democrats hold at all. So I think that that's really evidence that, you know, it's not about changing hearts and minds. It's not about convincing people that late-term abortion is wrong. They already know. It's about getting around the confirmation bias they have about people who have more conservative views, ultimately. And in order to do that, we have to signal to them that we are the same in enough ways that they're willing to stop being shamed into silence, because that's what it is. We don't have to change hearts and minds. We have to change hearts and minds, but not about abortion, about being pro-life and about how we feel about pro-life people. And we have to change how people feel about their own ability to stand up for what's right and go against, you know, what they're told is necessarily popular.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's part of what, you know, I'm doing, you know, with this, you know, podcast, is let's humanize each other. I've had every type of person on my show, abuse survivors and drag queens and, you know, what's that damn, Proud Boys. I've had people from all walks of life come on, and eventually, usually we just talk about, you know, sure, we talk about politics, but also we talk about music and sex and other things. It's like, oh, you're a human too. Okay, rock and roll. You know what I mean? Oh, you're doing the best you can with what you've got too. Rock on, me too. Let's calm down, stop demonizing everybody on both sides.
Well, you and I have had to learn that. It's not that we're just so much better than everyone, as much as I'd like to believe that. It's just that we've had, because we take seemingly unpopular positions, we've had to ultimately find a way to exist in two different worlds. And by doing so, we know that it's not us versus them, that we're all just as susceptible to the same types of things, and that we need to listen to each other. Otherwise, you and I never get heard.
Right.
It's like we have to demonstrate that by example. But man, if only more people were as cool as us.
Oh, right? What the hell? So I also I do want to press you a little bit on that idea of, you know, when it comes to, because I don't know if you were necessarily 100% stating it because it's something you believe or because for the sake of the argument, like you said, but about the woman's body being, I get that. I get, you know, no one should be allowed to, but do you give any credence to the idea that the majority, at least over, I believe it's 97, 98 or more %, they elected to have sexual intercourse, often without a condom. You know, obviously there's mishaps, but they elected to risk having that baby be born. Is there, do you give credence personally to that argument?
Yeah, that's what my argument hinges on, actually. I mean, it's when you engage in something with known risks, very understood and high, like pregnancy through heterosexual intercourse happens at a rate of like 2 to 22% of the time. So it's like that's a really, really significant risk. And yeah, I think that gives us responsibility, just like in any, and I think that's consistent with how we treat the law in general, that when you enter into something knowing the risks, then you are responsible for the outcome.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it sucks really bad. Right. Sometimes that outcome seems, you know, vastly worse than the tiny risk. You know, it doesn't seem quite balanced, but that's still the reality. The risks are known, and therefore we have responsibility. But I think that's what that is still a consistent application of the way that we understand bodily rights. That it is not a breach of our right to have autonomy simply because you become pregnant through consensual acts. You had full autonomy, you still have full autonomy. There is no genuine loss of autonomy.
Right.
And therefore,
and when pro-choicers have that argument of, well, you know, it's my body, it's my choice, or you know, pro-lifers just want to control women. It's nonsense. If we could, as at conception, and I'm sure we'll be able to do this one day, if we, at conception, we're like, oh, there's a baby in there, or you know, whatever, whenever she knows, if she could go into somewhere, get the baby taken out and put it in an incubator and let it, or whatever it is, and let it grow to full term, rock and roll, do, you know, go about your day, whatever. I just want to protect that other separate life that has nothing to do, you know, obviously it's growing in you, it's eating, you know, what you eat and things like that. But outside of that, if we could just take it out, but it has nothing to do with me wanting to control a woman. You know, have you had those types of, obviously I'm sure you've faced lots of different arguments, but have you faced that one specifically?
Yeah, I think that comes about a lot, but I really think, again, it's really just about, I feel like, identity politics, and just like, I must believe that you have some kind of bad intention. Otherwise I have to actually consider your point of view. And it's like, even if you're talking about something so egregious sometimes, like fetal tissue research, like these really, really serious things that even the majority of pro-choicers they do not support it. But because you're bringing it up, it's like, oh, well, you don't really care about these women that are involved, you know. And I know that people don't actually feel that way. It's just, it's a knee-jerk reaction, because people believe that if they understand where you're coming from, then that is the same as agreeing with you. And you and I have had to learn the hard way that is not true. You can and you should come to understand other people's points of view in order to even know what you actually think. But the majority of people, in my experience, are unwilling to truly consider something from someone else's point of view, because they believe that will put them in a position of agreement with that person, and then they feel like complicit or something in it.
I've been on shows where someone said something and they made a good argument, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll give you that, because that's what you and I, when we've dug, I think the crux of that, or the you know, juice behind that is emotional maturity. And one of the things I talk about a lot on my show, and I find it lacking, whether it be far right or far left, is anytime you believe so much in that you, number one, can't even have a conversation. There's been a lot of that for the last, 5 years about, like, if you're on my page and you're a Trump supporter, I'm gonna block you. If you're, right. I can't even. There's a lot of can't evenings going on. If you believe in your believe so much that you can't have a conversation, that you want to shut the other side up, that you want to shadow ban them, it's because you're not emotionally doing the work to take care of yourself. That's what I think. You're not self-caring. It's a big San Francisco thing to lots of hippiness and whatever. I'm getting more used to it. I think I'm, a girl I was dating gave me some California white sage or whatever to bring in the car from California. So I'm trying to imbue the Upper West Side here with some sage.
Nice.
But that's a big thing to talk about, self-care and honesty and love and all that stuff. And I think that really makes people, when they're taking care of themselves, they don't take themselves so seriously that they can't be questioned. They don't take themselves so seriously and their beliefs so seriously that they can't have a conversation or at least exist on the other side. Anybody who's like, oh, we're getting ready for civil war, you're not meditating, bruh. Like, you're not praying, you're not doing, or whatever. You're not, but take a bath, have some sex, like, do what you need to do, make amends with your father, like, take care of yourself. Otherwise, you're
pray,
whatever, right? Take care of yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to be willing. It's going to be really serious. And I find that even with myself, I have to take sometimes day-long breaks from social media because I start thinking this is really important. And then I plug out and I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful day. Oh, look at the birds. I have laundry to do. Like, I need to do some writing. I have schoolwork. I have, my cul-de-sac, and taking care of myself is important. And then when I do that, I find, oh, this isn't, I mean, I have my beliefs, I have my vote, I can, whatever, but not to the point where I want to, you know, you know, the extremes, we're like killing an abortion doctor, or, the crazy stuff that both sides, both extremes are doing,
Yeah, I second that. I mean, but I think, that kind of extremism where people are just um, dismissing people because they have different points of view and are unwilling to consider and ready for civil war. I just see that so across the board. It really isn't specific to liberals or conservatives. Each side, and because I truly exist in both worlds. Each side thinks the other side is so mean. And it's just so funny to me because each side always says, okay, Teresa, but that their side is way meaner than us. And it's like, I can't even count how many people have said that from both sides. And it's shocking because it's like, you guys are both really mean.
Right.
and
I went to Oklahoma.
I
went to Oklahoma a few years ago. One of the things that helped me open up, I went to Oklahoma and I was like, oh, there's black kids running around with white kids and kids with pink hair and gay kids. Like, relax. Like, they're humans too. They just like barbecue more than, sage, or whatever. They don't have gluten-free stuff. That's all, really. You know what I mean? They believe in their God and they get together to watch football. And San Franciscans believe in their non-God or whatever, and they get together to, well, San Franciscans don't get together. Let's be real.
You're such a hater.
Huh?
You're such a hater.
I know. Well, that's the thing. I talked about it before I moved, but it's like San Francisco is the city that sleeps, not just with the stuff that goes on, but everybody likes to stay up maybe till 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe, the crazy ones, but they get their Grubhub and they watch Netflix alone in pajama pants. New Yorkers like to, what's going on? Let's do,
We're way more awkward. Well, I mean, we're a city full of like techies. So what do you expect? We're just a bunch of nerds who are like socially awkward and, very unlikely to want to paint the town red. But I don't know. I think it's gotten more annoying to me over time, just how everyone is annoying, and everyone thinks the other person is more annoying. Like that San Francisco is just, so annoying and horrible in all these ways, or no, it's the South, these like, horrible Trump supporters. And like, the reality is we all have reasons for believing what we do. And this idea that the people on the other side are so fundamentally flawed, like that doesn't make any sense. We all have the same DNA. We're all human beings. We all have the same ability and capacity to think and feel. And there's not something fundamentally wrong with the other people. It's that we're fundamentally unwilling to have our views challenged. And that's because it is so deeply uncomfortable when we realize that there aren't answers necessarily. And it's so much more comfortable to feel secure in believing that you are right and that the people around you reinforce those ideas, and it helps inform your worldview and for you to get through your life with less stress. And look, I don't blame people for wanting that. I kind of wish I wasn't woke. I really do, because it's really painful. It sucks. Like, I don't want to have to think about dead babies. I don't want to have to be, told that I hate women. I don't want to have to be told that I'm actually just, furthering the culture of death in the pro-life movement because I'm an atheist. Like, every circle I go into, I'm pissing someone off just by existing, and it isn't fun. So it's annoying that it's people like us that have had to learn these hard lessons, but now we have to go teach everybody else. It's exhausting.
And now, not just teach everybody else, but face the brunt of it. Have you had threats?
What's that?
Have you had threats?
Not that I recall in this moment. I mean, definitely like on the street and stuff, people will say they're going to kick my ass, or, go home KKK, fuck you anti-choice bitch, that kind of stuff. But no one's ever, not yet. Maybe after this podcast, someone will start.
Actually, there's across the board, Mark Hughes is a Canadian comic, and he was on my show, the episode before you. Very different, not different conversation in the spirit of it, but very different, we say some foul things. Just for anybody who's found my show through Terrisa, just know the next episode is going to have a lot of horrible words that one of the things that he and I talked about was he is, kind of a over the top offensive comic, and it's fun and whatever, but he's got a good heart. It's not he makes jokes because he's evil. He makes jokes because he's giving a gift to the people who understand context and want that type of humor. And he got a bunch of death threats, and he was putting on a show. Every comedy show he puts on, he has to be in a secret venue, because otherwise the people will go online and write nasty emails and say they're going to show up. And so he had a show 2 nights ago where people were like, we're going to come, we're going to come, we're going to come, we're going to kick your ass. Nobody showed up. Nobody. There was no death. There was no assault. There was no nothing. It's just more they want to shut you up through fear.
Definitely. It's a little easier for me, though, because I do have such intersectional beliefs that I think for the most part, people just want me to kind of go away. They don't want to necessarily make a big deal about what I'm doing because it would put too much attention on it.
Have a conversation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's really hard to demonize me as a right-wing religious extremist, or even just as someone who's not informed or who hasn't had enough life experience. All of these things are just not really working to anyone's advantage by putting a spotlight on me, except unborn. So I think that kind of saves me a little bit. And, being a woman and speaking about abortion is certainly more favorable, I would think, than for a man, which again, I think is unfortunate, but also it's an important way that we can reach people on the other side by demonstrating sameness with their values, by, magnifying the voices of women within the pro-life community. But, everybody's voice matters.
Right.
It's just, we want to find the most strategic way of magnifying those voices so that we can bring about justice in our communities.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of websites. I can't remember the one specifically, but there's websites filled with all kinds of testimonials of women who have had abortions and men who have either decided to, elect it as well with the woman to have an abortion, or didn't have a choice in it. The woman who they were partnered with said, no, I'm going to. And so they lost that child. And there's a lot of testimonials out there, videos upon videos upon videos of people who have that. And I believe the same thing goes. I think, the fact that I'm, racially in the middle or whatever means I use my identity to hold a mirror up identity politics wise in order to shut that down as much as I can. To like, okay, now you're being a hypocrite. I think I've had 1 or 2 negative comments from Black people as an example, but most of the time it's whites telling me, a non-white, that I'm a Nazi. It's like, what? Like, shouldn't something short in your brain? Anyway.
Yes.
So, we'll start wrapping up here in a minute. What's your ideas moving forward? As far as I have my beliefs and stuff, and I'm certainly not going to, poke you on it. But like going forward, you have, maybe your hope is not like, Trump as an example, but do you hold hope for if Amy gets into SCOTUS, the Supreme Court? What's your hope for how we move forward?
Well, I think that there are several different ways that we need to move forward as a movement. One of those is getting Amy Coney Barrett confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. She certainly has made her pro-life views known, so we feel pretty confident that she would be in a position to help overturn Roe versus Wade, which has been a goal of the pro-life movement since the very beginning. The pro-life movement was born out of Roe v. Wade. There wasn't really a debate in this country until after that decision was made, which is kind of ironic because they made the court made that decision believing that it would settle the issue, but it really has ignited the longest running and largest human rights resistance or human rights. Well, I want to say demonstration because I'm thinking of the March for Life. The March for Life is the largest human rights demonstration in the history of the world. I don't know if your viewers knew that. So this is a human rights movement that has been going on for more than 40 years. And we have been able to attract one of the most diverse movements in the world. And those things are hidden from the American people for the most part. It's very, the media goes out of their way to make the movement appear only Christian and right wing, and therefore making it very hard for other people to engage realistically with the issue. And Dr. Bernard Nathanson wrote about this in the very beginning of the movement, that they worked really hard to make sure that the movement was it was seen as like a religious and conservative thing. And so, and that tactic has worked all of these decades. And in so many ways, we played right into it as a movement. I speak to Christians all the time who are like, yeah, well, I'm against abortion, but I don't want to force my religion on other people. And it's like, hello, this is not a religious issue, but they believe that it is because our opposition has spent so much time believing that. I believe that the abortion industry only has power in this country because of their relationship with the Democratic Party. And as we discussed before, like, I really think that the concept of abortion and, you know, it doesn't square away with the liberal value of protecting the marginalized, of equality, nonviolence, and non-discrimination. But our party has developed a financial relationship with the abortion industry decades ago, and that industry has been funding the political campaigns of the leadership of the party for decades. And the leadership has gotten more and more and more extreme, and they are taking more and more and more campaign contributions from Planned Parenthood. And now the abortion industry and the Democratic Party are almost it looks like they're almost the same, even though the vast majority of Democrats have concerns about abortion, want it to be at least regulated, and most do not support taxpayer funding of abortion. So the future for me as a pro-life leftist is going to be to continue to try to get people like me, or even just pro-choice people who believe abortion should be restricted in these later trimesters, to have a place to express that dissent, and to ultimately use those voices to put the pressure on the party to break that relationship with the abortion industry, and to ultimately allow a strong pro-life voice at least to be heard alongside pro-choice voices within the Democratic Party. I think that is ultimately the key to being able to get, generally speaking, left-leaning people to be more open to the pro-life cause. We have to make it as nonpartisan as possible. And yet it makes sense that so many different aspects of the movement have focused on the partisan issue and ensuring that they're electing, you know, people who are going to further life-affirming agendas. So it's like we have to work both of those causes. I'm not saying it's one or the other, but my role, the future of my role, is going to be to disrupt the Democratic Party on this issue, to force, or not to force, but to inspire the majority of Democrats to join me in enforcing change within the party, and stopping this like capitalistic patriarchy that's happening in our party. And I think it's a progressive value. I think that it is something that ultimately progressives can very much get on board with if they're told that it's okay. So I want to do that. And then of course we want the DOJ to hand down indictments to Planned Parenthood. We want them to do prison time for selling baby body parts and for harvesting organs from babies born alive. We want justice in those cases, and that will absolutely devastate the abortion industry on another level. Those indictments and hopefully the dissolution of or the dissolving of Planned Parenthood in general. And I think, you know, with a pro-life Supreme Court, with Planned Parenthood not receiving federal money and in prison and indicted, and we shut down fetal trafficking in this country, and I'm able to disrupt the Democratic Party and to get the majority of Democrats to back off of abortion extremism, then I think we're going to see a significant ideological shift in this nation.
It's great. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't, I know a lot of liberal people and they're not evil. You know what I mean? Like I know a lot of conservative people, they're not evil. But I think the majority of people who are pro-choice, just they've heard what they've heard. It makes sense. Oh, I like women, so I want to protect women's rights. So of course I'm pro-choice. And
I like women, I hate conservatives. Boom.
Right. And that of courseness is the problem, which is a very Brooklyn and Berkeley thing. Of when I went to Phil's Coffee the first time and they didn't even explain, oh, you stand up, they were just like, of course you're supposed to know how to order coffee at Phil's. There's a hipsterness embedded in the progressive, anyway, awfulness.
Oh, it's on the conservative side too, but in a different way. You gotta know all the ropes.
I would say yes, but when I've seen videos of MAGA people and a liberal comes, Carolyn Rita as an example, a friend of Mike Harlow, who's a friend of mine, was a big anti-Trump person, and she went to a rally, you know what I mean? And when she was like, yeah, I don't like Trump, the people around her at the rally, well, you're welcome anyway, honey. You know what I mean? Like it's that they are a little bit, I don't know. I think they're a little, as long as you're
But you've seen all the videos of people getting their asses kicked at Trump rallies too.
Okay.
I mean, it goes both ways. People exist on a spectrum. There are people that are very good, and there are people that are very psycho.
Right.
And I don't mean to use that in an ableist way. People that are just, on another level, unhinged.
Right.
But that exists. That spectrum is the same on both sides. I don't care.
Touche. I think it happens more often on the left right now. As far as violence, as far as like if someone's wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt in Raleigh or somewhere like that, they're not going to get attacked. If they're wearing a MAGA hat in San Francisco, I've talked with, Mike Harlow as an example has been, after speaking at the RNC, was chased down the street. He had a rally, he was chased down the street by Black Lives Matter. He's this little skinny, gay kid and was assaulted essentially and spit on.
I'm sure that's true, but I'm telling you, at least anecdotally in my experience, I've gotten way more harassed and way more threatened for wearing Black Lives Matter stuff than ever, like supporting conservative stuff in San Francisco.
Where? That's interesting. Where?
Online especially, and I lose followers every time online if I post anything about Black Lives Matter. Okay. So I would say that
interesting.
That I think, and I do watch Fox News from time to time, and I think that the way that, especially the way that liberals are being portrayed as violent, first of all, that is a very powerful tactic and rhetoric. It's really important in these types of presidential campaigns. I've read a lot about social justice movements. It makes sense why they're doing it, but it's important for conservatives to understand that narrative is way, way overblown. And it's like, even, oh gosh, what was the department? Some, government department just recently released a statement saying the biggest threat to of violence in this country, according to their reports, is from white supremacists, not Black Lives Matter protesters. And it's like, if you talk to any conservative and you even mention that point, and I really wish I had the source now, I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but I've shared that with conservatives, and they just double down and say, no, that absolutely cannot be true. They believe it can't be true because the narrative that they're constantly being told is that that's not true. But what I can tell you is that the stats seem to suggest that narrative is incorrect. And I realize that there are a lot of anecdotal circumstances, and we really do, depending on the types of news outlets we're getting, we really are like, oh yeah, those people are jerks. They are really being violent. But that kind of violence, it totally exists on both sides. We are both just as susceptible. And this is an election year, and we have to understand that has been played on every election season since the dawn of human history. So take it with a grain of salt. Liberals are not all violent. They're not more violent than conservatives. And technically speaking, white supremacists are the most violent. And most conservatives I know deny the existence of white supremacists to the most degree. Like they'll say, okay, maybe there's a couple, but like anytime I've said, oh, I saw white supremacists here, or I seen white supremacists here, conservatives I know will say, oh, I doubt that. Oh yeah, right. That's not true. Like they're just
at
so
the very least, which
in
at the very
disbelief.
least should be a good sign to the liberals, because that essentially is saying that they don't want to be. That those people who are even denying, at least that's a good sign that they're not wanting white supremacy. That's good, right? That should at least humanize those conservatives.
I
You know what I mean?
suppose, but that's not the point of
No,
the
no,
conversation around race.
Right.
It isn't whether or not we're pointing out like implicit racism. It's just like those underlying values of being so quick to defend,
Right.
you know, oh no, there couldn't have been white supremacists out there.
It's about, I want my side to win, and I don't care what the other argument.
Yeah, and I feel like liberals are always just calling racism or calling white supremacy when they don't see it. Well, how about conservatives never even acknowledging when it's really there, and trying to make it seem like liberals are the more violent when we know that it's the threats of white supremacy. So that's my position on that. I think definitely liberals are not more violent than conservatives, and I really, really want your conservative audience to not buy into that like political rhetoric so hardcore and believe it like, you know, as gospel truth, because it's not.
Right. Well, you know, I don't know if we're going to see too much eye to eye, but I think it's essentially the bottom line is I don't even really believe that the majority of the Antifa kids are, you know, the really violent ones are actually liberal in general. You know what I mean? I think they're just more anarchist than anything. I think they're just,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think
they're like all of us. They're looking for community and purpose, and Antifa gives that to young people, same as white supremacist groups. And both of those need to be, we should be concerned about all, you know, extremist groups that are resulting to violence in order to address their, you know, perception of social ills.
Right. Yeah, definitely agreed. And let's wrap up, but just, you know, we're on the same page that the majority of pro-choicers are good, well-intentioned. But you also,
that I totally disagree with. They're the worst. I'm just kidding. I love my pro-choice friends. Love you guys. Love you.
You fit well on the show. But you did say that some of the people up top, because that's the thing too, that a lot of see, I almost said it. I didn't say it.
Hey, you can say it. I'm an atheist.
All right, a lot of motherfuckers. A lot of people, a lot of people on the right or on the pro-life movement will say, you know, liberals, you know, the people at the top, they're baby eaters. No, I don't think there's a pedophile ring. Relax. I mean, yes, we need, you know, there's obviously some crazy, but I think the Planned Parenthood Democratic Party involvement is not, we hate blacks as much, or we hate children as much as it is, yay, give me money. It's yay, I want money. It's, I'm afraid of my security for me and for my family and for my children's children. And it just feels good to feel secure. And so we'll compartmentalize that it's a living thing and just become. So do you feel like even the people at the top who have made those connections and those deep roots between Planned Parenthood and the Democratic Party, do you feel like even they are well-intentioned, or?
I don't think people at the top are well-intentioned. I think they are, well, maybe to the degree that you mentioned, like they want to provide for their families, but I think it's about money and power more than just like providing for your family. I think and they're gaining that money and power by their relationships with Gates, with Buffett, with the people that are really concerned about population control and, you know, manipulating the masses. And who knows, you know, it's like, I don't feel like that's a conspiracy theory to suggest. I mean, we know that there are a lot of people out there with like the resources and the concern to address population control. And I think that whatever their plans are, the people that they have at the top of the abortion industry are gaining enormous wealth and power, both political power across the globe. I mean, we're talking about massive amounts of money and power. We have 1 million deaths in this country alone every year, well, roughly, by abortion, and globally, I mean, you can't even, that number is astronomical. And the perpetuation of that, there's just so many industries and ways that those things can be exploited and used to like better society. And so I think ultimately, I think there's always a little bit of both. There's always a little bit of good intention behind, like, you know, you want money and power so that you can do what you want to do with the world and do what you think is right. But I think there's just so much corruption. As we know, money corrupts, power corrupts. And when you're talking about gaining money and power through the destruction of innocent people, that just seems wrong.
Right. And for those who want to do some research into it, it's definitely tedious. You know, number one, it's tedious to question yourself. It's hard, I hate it. But it's tedious to question your own beliefs. It's that cognitive dissonance thing where it's just, you know what, I'd rather just get some Panda Express and watch The Office. And that's fine. You know, there's time for that. But there are many websites out there. One in particular was I'm going to mess it up, but it's a great website that deals specifically with campaign contributions, and it goes year by year, and you know, and Planned Parenthood is huge, and it's not from a pro-life website, it's not from a pro-choice website, it's from a middle of the road numbers accounting, you know, website. There's websites out there that you can trust that where you can see it for yourself, where you can look at how much does the NRA versus how much does Planned Parenthood donate? How much does this company, does that company? Who's investing in these ideologies and pushing this? And that's, you know, it's important research to do for yourself, you know, people.
Well, and that's why it's complicated even conceptualizing a political party that doesn't have interests in human rights violations, because human rights violations are fueled by the bottom line for somebody. It's a financial incentive involved in any human rights violation. And when you're talking about a massive scale, you know, it's just, you're always going to have that problem of that corruption of like, we need to continue these human rights violations in order to ensure, you know, like from the Democratic side, you know, it's immigration, you know, that's the big like exploitive thing, and that we won't fix because we're perfectly happy, you know, making sure our economy is running on, you know, very cheap labor, etc. So it's just, from the perspective of a whole life Democrat or whatever, it seems like almost an impossible dream to believe that we can bolster a political party, that we can win and give power to a political party that isn't taking contributions or isn't involved in some way in some horrific human rights violations, like keeping Guantanamo open, or, you know, whatever it is. There's some political relationship in order to keep it happening.
Right. How can people help? Because I think you know, whether or not, you know, people disagree with, I mean, I can already feel like when we were starting to talk about a lot of these things, I can feel certain fans of mine who are more on the right side who are going to be annoyed with that part, and then people, you know, who are liberal fans of mine who are going to be annoyed with that part. So, but there's going to be a lot of people who, just by me, you know, being a bit of a, you know, I push the boundary a little bit, be a little bit of a troll, just by saying that, oh, remember how last time I had Kristen Hawkins, a Republican, you know, conservative Christian on, who is pro-life? Well, now I have an atheist, Democrat, vegan on my show who's pro-life. Haha. Where can there's going to be people who want to do more research into this? So where can people find you, either Instagram, website, wherever?
Yeah, I mean, definitely check out prolifesf.com, like you mentioned, in all of our social media channels. Our YouTube especially has several of my talks over the years, especially my presentation at UC Berkeley, which I highly recommend, because that was actually given, you know, to a pro-choice audience in a class called The Social, Ethical, and Political Issues in Public Health. So I highly recommend checking that out. But also follow me personally at Terrisa Lin. It's TerrisaLin. on Instagram, and I'm less on Twitter. I'm more visual, but you know, it's a cute account. You'll love it. Follow me.
Right. And then have heated debates on, you know, in comments, you know, without listening to each other.
Yeah, other people. I'll
Right.
probably ignore them. I'm busy.
Got stuff to do.
Yeah.
I can already feel, because it's the Tenderloin thing. I know there's a crystal behind you somewhere. I just know that there's a salt lamp. Yeah.
I'm actually, I am in an Airbnb in Cleveland right now,
Nice.
because I'm protesting tonight at the presidential debate.
Good for
So
you.
yeah. Yeah, got to yell at everybody for being too
Yes.
pro-abortion. Everyone's getting yelled at.
Yes. Well, stay safe out there. We
Thank
support you. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you,
And,
Peter. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and everybody, wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe and share. And find me on Instagram at Peter_Feliciano, and TikTok right now for now at CONSERVATISH, and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. Thank you so much again, Terrisa. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.